Alright, rhythms. Let's just review, since it's been a while since we've talked about rhythms, what and how rhythm works. And then we're going to add two new ideas to the whole rhythm thing. And the first thing we have to remember is that our time signature gives us important information. The time signature is this little thing right here on the left. And the top number tells us how many beats are in a measure. A measure, of course, being the space between two bar lines. So in this case, it's 4. The bottom one tells us what note gets the measurement of a beat. In this case, a quarter note, which tells us that 4 quarter notes can fit in one measure. Okay? And don't worry about the pitches right now. This is just a time to do rhythms. I'll try to keep them all in the same place. But think about it in terms of rhythms. We have 4 beats here. Okay? 4 quarter notes in a measure. 1, 2, 3, 4. So if you provide a pulse, and then you were to start it, you would have 1, 2, 3, 4 of your counting. How long is that? First of all, what kind of note is it? Hopefully you remember that it's a half note. It's a half note because it's half of a whole note, so it's 2 beats. If we're counting this in 4/4 time, we would count 1, 3, so it starts with 1, takes up all of beat 2, is still held out, and then the next attack, the next start on the note would be on beat 3. So, if we're thinking about this in time, 2, 3, 4, 1, 3. Okay, that's when the notes start. A whole note fills up a whole measure in 4/4 time, which is important, and it gets 4 beats, so it's held out for 4 full beats. So let's just take a chance to count this together. We'll use that first measure as kind of our sense of tempo. It will give us what the beat is, and then we will just count the numbers as we go. Feel free to do it along with the video. 1, 3, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4. And each one of those notes has a corresponding rest. A quarter rest looks kind of like a funky little lightning bolt thing. A half rest is going to look, I like to think of it like a hat. So there's a line underneath with a box on top, like a top hat. And then of course a whole rest are the ones you see all over the page, which is like the top hat inverted. Or another way to think of it is like a hole in the ground. The line is the ground and the black space is the hole. Okay? A half rest is of course 2 beats, and a whole rest is 4 beats in 4/4 time. This is important. Okay? These numbers, and we'll talk later about what kind of other options there are for this, but when the bottom number is 4, all of this is true. Okay, let me say that again. The bottom number is 4. All of this is true for these lengths. A quarter note is 1 beat, a half note is 2 beats, a whole note is 4 beats. Now if the top note is 3, obviously you can't fit a whole note into a measure because there are only 3 beats and a whole note lasts for 4. The last one to review are the eighth notes. Okay, that's one eighth note by itself. Each eighth note is a half of a beat in 4/4 time. So there's a pattern here. We have a whole note, which is 4 beats. We divide it in 2. We have a half note, which is 2 beats. 4 divided by 2 is 2. Okay? Then we divide it in 2 again. So 2 divided by 2 is 1. That gives us a quarter note. And a quarter note is 1 beat. Divide a quarter note in half, and we get an eighth note, which is 2 beat, which is a half a beat. Sorry, I don't know what caused me to space out that way. So each eighth note is a half of a beat. Now there's a couple of different ways to count this. I'm going to mention both of them. I may even interchange it as we go. Okay? But for the purposes of this first time, each downbeat, that's the start of a beat, the first half, each one of those gets a number. In that case, there's beat 1. That's the first half. This is the second half. Here's beat 2. That's the first half. This is the second half. Here's beat 3. The first half, and then the second half. First half, and then the second half, and then beat 4. So each one of those is going to get its known number. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay? Each upbeat, this first time I'm going to call te. So it'll be 1 te, 2 te, 3 te, 4 te. Now the other system, depending on what people grew up with and what they want to use that is common is called and. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And I may switch back and forth, although I'm going to try to stick with the Eastman, the Tay system for the most part. So, let me put a quarter note back in the measure before it so we can get our beat pulse, and let's count this together. So we'll have one measure worth of quarter notes, and then we're going to count our eighth notes. 1 Tay. Each upbeat is a Tay. Ready, go. 1 Tay, 2 Tay, 3 Tay, 4 Tay. Now it goes a little fast. Let's do it a little slower, just so that we can stick together. 2, ready, go. 1 Tay, 2 Tay, 3 Tay, 4 Tay. And each downbeat, each first half of the eighth note pair, gets the number of the beat it happens on. Each second half of the eighth note pair gets a Tay, or an and, depending on what you want to do. Now these are important concepts, and if this is confusing, this was just a review. Go back and watch the video earlier on that talks about rhythm and time signatures. It talks about it a little bit more in depth. But we're going to move on for right now, and we're going to move on to dots. And dots are pretty cool, but dots can be a bit confusing. Okay? A dot is a thing that you add to a note to make it longer, or a rest. Okay? And it makes it a specific length longer depending on what it's next to. So it doesn't always, a dot does not always make something a certain length. A dot adds to it based on what it's next to. So for instance, if we have a quarter number, which it shows right here, and there's a dot next to it, the dot adds half of whatever it's next to. So let me say that again. The dot adds half of whatever it's next to. So in this case, it's next to a quarter note. So how long is a quarter note? Well, as we just talked about it, a quarter note is 1 beat. So a dot adds half of 1 beat. So what is half of 1? That's right, it's a half. So when we add a dot to a quarter note, we take the quarter note. Oh, that's really a lousy thing. I just noticed they did that. That shouldn't have a dot. So there we go. Wink. Okay, we take the quarter note and we add an eighth note to it when there's a dot, and that gives us a dotted quarter note. It's 1.5 beats long. Okay, so let me say that again. It's also written up here. A dotted quarter note is 1.5 beats long because the dot adds half of the note that it's next to. So in this particular case, our quarter note here was 1 beat. It fills up all of beat 1. The dot is a half of a beat, so it fills up the first half of beat 2. Then the next note here is on the second half of beat 2. So would we say 2 out loud when we counted this? No, we wouldn't, because it's part of this dotted quarter note. So when we're thinking about the pulse here, if I have a pulse, and I'm going to count that measure right where the mouse cursor is, I'm going to end up counting it. 1, Tay, 3, Tay. Notice how the Tays happened when there was no click of my fingers, or tap. Listen again. 1, Tay, 3, Tay. Okay, so each one of those happens on an upbeat, a time where there's not a tap of the pulse, a halfway point in the beat. So the dotted quarter note becomes 1.5 beats long. What would a dotted half note be? If I were to jump back over here and place a half note in a measure, boom, half note. How long is a half note? That's right, it's 2 beats. So what does the quarter note do? Or sorry, what does the dot do? I guess I kind of gave away the answer there. The dot adds half of the note it's next to. So what's half of 2? That's right, 1. And 1 plus 2 is? Obviously 3. So how long is this note that I just put up there, a dotted half note? That's right, 3 beats. You got it, good. So if I have a 4/4 measure, which means I can only have 4 beats in a measure, how many beats are left in this measure to fill at the end? The end of that first measure the end of the first line. If I've already taken up 3 beats and I can only have 4, how many are left? Bingo, 1. which I could fill like that. That would count. But you know what? That would count too. How would I count this measure? What's the first thing I'm going to say? The first thing, of course, if you're counting the numbers, is always 1. Okay? And then it's going to last how many beats? 2 beats plus the dot, which is half of 2, is 1. So that means the whole thing lasts for, bingo, 3 beats. So I'm going to have 1, and I'm going to have to hold it for beat 2 and beat 3. And then when I get to the end of the measure, I have 4 and te, or and. So let's just count through these couple of measures. We'll get our pulse. Go. 1 te, 2 te, 3 te, 4 te, 1, 4 te. And the trick is while you're holding out 1, 1, 4 te, you have to be thinking 1, 2, 3, 4 te. You have to think the beats that are happening and you sustain. And that can be a bit tricky. So it's very important that whether it's a quarter note, or a half note, or a whole note, or an eighth note, that you're thinking through what the beats are. So we have a dotted quarter note, followed by an eighth note, followed by a half note. What would we say out loud for that? How would we count it? Give you another moment to think. Well, let's start with the first thing. Easy answer. First thing is always that we count. If there's a note and not a rest, is always, that's right, 1. Okay, and how long is this dotted quarter note again? Well, we have our quarter note, which is 1 beat, and we add the dot, which divides it in half and then adds them. So 1 divided by 2 gives us a half. So 1 plus a half is 1 1/2, which means this next thing, this eighth note by itself right here, does it happen on a downbeat or an upbeat? If this dotted quarter note is longer than a beat, it's a beat 1/2, is this eighth note on one of the beats, on one of the beats, or on one of the upbeats, the second half? Good, it's on the second half. So we'd have 1 te, then what? Well, beat 1 is here. Where's beat 2? If you said the dot, if you said that's that half, 1 1/2 beats of the dotted quarter note, you were exactly right. Good job. So beat 1 is there, beat 2 is there. This is the te of 2, which means the next thing has to be, good, 3. Now, I'm going to encourage you, if you can find some music math problems and you want to work out some rhythm, how to make it fit in a measure, that would be awesome. I may have to look up some and add a link or something in the description. We'll see. But that's how the dot works. The dot adds half of whatever it's next to the note. So it makes everything longer by half of whatever the thing is it's attached to, which is kind of confusing. So the best way to think about it is a dot makes it longer, a dotted half note makes it longer by 1 beat, a dotted quarter note makes it longer by a half a beat. And what would a dotted whole note do? If we had a whole note, like we have here in the third measure, how many beats is it? Hopefully you guessed 4. Well, hopefully you didn't guess. Okay? And so a dot adds half of what it's next to, so a dotted half note would be take 4 and divide it in half, cut it in half. So what's half of 4? Good, 2. And 2 plus 4 is? Right, 6. So a dotted whole note would be 6 beats. Can we fit a dotted whole note in a measure here? No, of course we can't, because we can only fit 4 beats in a measure, not 6. But if you could, if you change this number to 6, then you would be able to have a dotted whole note. The other thing we're going to talk about are a new kind of note, and that is the 16th note. Okay, 16th notes are half of 8th notes. So let me say it again. 16th notes are half of 8th notes. And if an eighth note is a half of a beat, how long is a 16th note? Another way to think about it is, if there are two eighth notes in one beat, which there are, two halves and a whole, how many 16th notes would be in a beat? Well, hopefully you said 4. Think of it like quarters. How many quarters are in a dollar? 4. Obviously, everybody who deals with American money knows this. There are 4 quarters in a dollar. Well, there are 4 quarter notes in a measure. There are also 4 16th notes in a beat. So each 16th note is a quarter of a beat. And a 16th note looks like this. This is one 16th note by itself. A little note head with 2 flags on it. 2 16th notes will have, or more, will have 2 lines in between the notes, most of the time. Okay? And the way we're going to count these, 2 different ways to count them. The way they listed here is in the and systems, which says 2, which is the number of the beat, the first thing on a downbeat. Whatever it is, if it's on a downbeat, when we count it, always gets the number. So we have 1 and, or 1 te. Then we have 2, that's the downbeat. Then in the and system, we have 2 e and a. Notice that the and, or the te, is still halfway. So it's the halfway point of the beat. Downbeat, halfway, upbeat. Downbeat, upbeat. And then we fill in with an e and an a to fill in the other parts. If we're doing Eastman, like the te system, we have 2, ti, te, ta. So the way we would count this is 1 te, 2 ti, te, ta, 3 te, 4. Or in the and system, 1 and 2 e and whoops. It's late, computer and me are not getting along. And 3 and 4. So let's go a couple of times to count this. 1, 2, ready, go. 1 te, 2 ti, te, ta. Oh, did I do that right or did I do that wrong? You tell me based on your feeling of pulse. Was that correct? Could you tell me what I did wrong? If you can't, go back and listen to it. Okay, I'll do it right this time. Sometimes it's good to make sure people are paying attention. Here's our pulse, and ready, and go. 1 te, 2 ti, te, ta, 3 te, 4. I'm going to do that again in the and system. 2, ready, go. 1 and 2 e and 3 and 4. So when doing that, our pulses still lined up just like they always would. Okay? What about this measure here? How will we count this one? It's actually less complicated. Eighth notes in the first 2 beats. 16th notes on beat 3. How many 16th notes are in a beat? Hopefully you got 4. Just remember, each 16th note is a fourth of a beat, and then a quarter note on the end. Let's count it together. And ready, and go. 1 te, 2 te, 3 ti, te, ta, 4. Do it in the other system if you want to. If not, just listen. Ready, and go. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Good. Could you figure out how to count the next measure? Take a look at it. What's the first thing whenever we have a note or even a rest at the beginning of the measure? That's right, it's 1. So we have beat 1, and it's only an eighth note. Okay? It only has the 1 bar, not the 2 bars. So if it's only an eighth note, it's how long? Half a beat. So if this takes up all of the first half of the beat, that's 1. What's the next half of a beat have to be? What do we say for this or for that? Te or and. Let's go ahead and just stick with te's for a moment, just because that will make things less confusing. So we have 1, then we have te, because it's on the second half, the upbeat. But then what's the last 16th note? Think through when we count them. 1, T, te, ta, ta. Okay, so we have 1, te, ta. Give the pulse for that. 1, te, ta. What would the next thing be when we get here? If we have a half of a beat, so 1/2 plus a quarter equals a whole. That may be confusing. Let me say it again. A half of a beat plus a quarter of a beat plus a quarter of a beat equals 1 beat. Okay, so that takes up 1 beat, which means the very next thing we'd say would have to be good, 2. So I'm just going to count through this one real quick. This measure only. And I'll give a pulse for it when I do. And just try to follow along. 2, ready, and I'll go. 1, teta, 2, te, 3, t, teta, 4, te. Now I'm going to give a pulse and I want you to try it. 2, ready, go. 4, te. Did you line up forte with me? Hopefully so. If not, feel free to go back and loop that section to practice it. Also, I encourage you, I'm going to scroll, let's not deal with that, that's too complicated, but I encourage you to try to count and figure out how to count everything in these first 2 lines. Because everything in there should make sense if the idea of the 16th note makes sense. And the 8th note. How we divide the beats up. If not, feel free to post a comment or send me a message, and I'll be happy to make one that goes maybe into a little bit more depth. But that's the basic of it. Now this is going to cover not everything, of course, that you'll see in music, this whole series, but this gives a fair enough foundation that we can start talking about stuff in a new series that's a little bit more, you know, let's actually make sounds happen, as opposed to here's what the notation looks like. So hopefully all of that makes sense, and I look forward to getting started on the next portion of the project.